A warm welcome back, everyone, to Bookish. We're your virtual program on authors, thinkers, and the literary life produced by the Southern California News Group, with the Bay Area News Group as well. I'm Sandra Tsing Loh, a Bookish host from the Before Times, sitting in from Sam Dunn, senior editor of premium content. On her and SCNG's behalf, we want to give a big thank you to our Reader Reward subscribers for supporting our programs. If you're a Reader Reward subscriber attending today, our favorite people, you're automatically entered to win a $50 gift certificate from Arvida Book Company in Tustin. Visit it. Our winner last month was Nancy Hyde. Congratulations. We hope you're enjoying your books. And if you're not a subscriber yet, why in tarnation not? In Southern California, go to scng.com/subscribe to find your local paper. In the Bay Area, go to bayareanewsgroup.com/reader services. Please become a stakeholder in local journalism. P.S. If you've missed our past programs, check them out at scng.com/virtual programs. Speaking of checking outing, there's also Bookish swag for our stylish book nerds. And today is our inaugural 4 p.m. start time today. Thanks to your feedback. Let us know if you like it, and we'll do it again next month. And as you do, let's go through our usual reminders. If you have questions, please use the Q&A feature on your Zoom toolbar. If you just want to add a comment, use your screen's chat feature. If you want to leave us mid-program today for some reason, call from a teen cat on a roof, don't worry, a link to the full program will be sent later. The show is also posted at scng.com/virtual events, as well as YouTube. As for today, I'm thrilled to be guest hosting our program, which features journalists with new books. 3 of the most incredibly different books you can imagine. All terrific. First up, one of our Bookish returning favorites, Henry Alford. The 30-second download. Humorist and journalist Henry Alford has been called a classicist, firmly in the mold of Wilde, Waugh, and Benchley by the New York Times Book Review, the Socrates of dilettantes by Newsweek, and the beloved not a beloved, but the beloved investigative humorist by New York Magazine. Alford has written for The New Yorker for over 2 decades, a longtime columnist for the New York Times and contributing editor to Vanity Fair. You might have heard him on National Public Radio and interviewed on television by folks you may have heard of like Jay Leno and Conan O'Brien. His investigative humor or humorously investigative books include And Then We Danced, about dance, Would It Kill You to Stop Doing That, about manners, a book about the wisdom of people over the age of 70, How to Live, a search for wisdom from old people while they are still on this earth. Municipal Bondage, I will say that's about New York. You have to read it. An account of his attempts to become a working actor, Big Kiss, which won a Thurber Prize for American Humor. His newest book is I Dream of Joni, instead of I Dream of Jeannie, I Dream of Joni, a portrait of Joni Mitchell in 53 snapshots. Welcome, Henry.
Hello, Sandra. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's such a it's always such a huge pleasure. Okay, so question 1. In the
Yes.
Bookish, it'll be 2 sentences away from Joni, and then we're going to go back. We've actually interviewed Peter Frampton on this show, and I think there's something about rock and popular musicians that it's kind of like the poster on the wall. Everyone's big sister had a Peter Frampton, comes to life poster and the hair and whatever. And he's actually really not like that. He just happened to have the hair at that time. But it's sort of this spell that it casts on college dorms everywhere. I mean, Joni Mitchell is another where people think of Joni Mitchell's Gals in Tie-Dye that I'm wearing with vanilla candles, journaling and weeping while listening to Blue. And that's sort of one aspect of her, but she's so much more than that. So I wonder if you could give sort of a quick snapshot of where she fits in popular culture for a moment, and then your particular journey of what she means to you and why you wrote this book.
Well, I think you're dead on with the tie-dye and the hippie accoutrement. Yeah, that she has really been fixed in people's consciousness as this very sensitive, emotionally fragile hippie goddess, the woman who wrote Woodstock. But in fact, No, she's much more complicated than that. This is a sometimes brash, this is a very feisty woman. This is a survivor. She's had to learn how to walk 3 times in her life. So there's a real perception reality thing going on. She's very different from her image.
Right. And Woodstock, can you just put a little bit more flesh around the sort of the contradiction about her writing Woodstock, for instance?
Oh, well, simply that, she didn't go to the concert because she had a talk show appearance the next day. She writes the song in the least hippie-ish place imaginable, David Geffen's hotel room. Um, and yeah, I mean, in terms of being a hippie, she's not a vegan or a vegetarian. She doesn't follow politics. She doesn't believe in free love. She's a serial monogamist. She has confessed to being a litterer. So not really a hippie.
Oh, not a litterer. And the chain.
Yes, a litterer.
No, say it ain't so. Okay, that's the worst. The show's over. We can't go on. But also a chain smoker, right? And
And chain smoker, 4 packs a day since she was 9 years old.
yeah, like astonishing. Okay. So, and this is very rich territory because she's a kind of contradictory character and charmingly ornery in a certain way. And so, well, to go back, but you just to end this question, but what is your particular journey of why you do not look like a girl in the hippie skirt with vanilla candles? Like, can you talk a little bit about your personal connection to Joni Mitchell's music, and then which inspired you to write a whole book, if you will?
Sure. Well, simply that I, like many people, my Joni origin story goes back to a dorm room. When I was 16, my dad died. I was at boarding school. I holed up in my room for the weekend. I put Blue on the turntable, and then I woke up the next morning embarrassed because it had played through the whole night. So I lifted the record up, turned it over, and played the other side for another 8 hours. So yeah, that was my early buy-in at age 16. And as it turns out, that's kind of her role for a lot of people, that she is this kind of sonic security blanket for so many people, particularly for women and for us gay guys. That she is, almost like a Jesus-like figure.
Can you say a little bit more about that? All of it?
Yeah,
Why not?
why not? Well, there it turns out that there's a reason why we like to listen to sad music. There's a neurological basis for it. Um, and it's because there's a tranquilizing hormone called prolactin, which is released when we listen to sad music. It's also in tears of sadness, but not tears of joy. But somehow sad music fakes our brain out, releases this hormone, and we, enjoy all the benefits of a good cry, that we feel ready for our next battle, we feel refreshed. So there's that going on, this neurochemical thing. And I think that just sort of really solidifies this sonic blanket idea.
And those are also in childbirth. Is it also released in childbirth? The prolactin
Prolactin, yeah,
on
it
those
is.
kinds of tears. So
Right.
we're all enjoying a female Earth mothery thing in that sense.
Exactly. We're just having a hormonal lightning storm every time we put on a Joni record.
So this book is said to be inspired by Craig Brown's amazing 99 Glimpses of Princess Margaret. For those unfamiliar with 99 Glimpses of Princess Margaret, can you talk a little bit about that book, how you came to it, how you responded to it, and how it inspired your format, your very interesting format for your book about Joni Mitchell?
So Craig Brown is an English satirist, and he wrote this book about Princess Margaret that's a lot of short chapters, and it almost has a if you'll forgive me for using this word, it's sort of a postmodern approach, which is to say it's almost like a biography about biography. So in his book, for instance, about Princess Margaret, there's a chapter that is just Princess Margaret's listings in indexes of other books, that he gets a whole chapter out of that. So I wanted to do stuff like that. For instance, I have a thing where I look at the punctuation in Joni's first three records, in the lyrics from her first three records, versus the punctuation in her three records. Oh, there we have it right there. Right, versus the three records when her life was just totally in the toilet. And in the first three records, there are no question marks, or I'm sorry, there are two question marks and zero exclamation points. In the three 80s records, there are 36 exclamation points and 72 question marks. So something was definitely going on to her.
Yeah, that's a very interesting way of looking at it. And in the infamous, where you're talking about how Judy Collins remembers the first like hearing of that chapter, can you just?
Oh, right. So it's a chapter that I actually didn't write anything. It's simply citations from Judy Collins's memoirs or from interviews that she's given, and it's her trying to remember how the song "Both Sides Now" came to her, because of course that's Joni Mitchell's that's when she becomes famous in the United States with Judy Collins's cover of Both Sides Now. And Judy Collins, she keeps changing the story. She thinks it's 4 o'clock in the morning, then she thinks it's 5 o'clock, she thinks it's this one singer-songwriter. And yeah, it's sort of it's my effort to ask questions like, how does history get told, and who do we believe here, and how does someone's vested interests color their memory of a historical event.
And yes, it's brilliant. So when reading this book, and it's a delight to read, and I think satirists writing these sorts of books with the humor and the prose really makes it like a fantastic read. And I think, and I was mentioning to you, Frank Zappa supposedly has this favorite quote that he said that writing about music is like dancing about architecture. And then, of course, I looked it up and went down the rabbit hole, and it's kind of like, well, variously attributed to Frank Zappa, Elvis Costello, Thelonious Monk, Miles Davis, and Laurie Anderson, amongst many others. So, and I can only imagine that your research for those, it started putting me in the mind of Henry Alford writing a book, as like you think somebody said something, and then when you think of these other people where they're copying it, what happened? So I thought, I wondered if we could play, like, and I think in certain sections of the book, it's so delightful. It actually reminded me of Camille Paglia's Break, Burn, Blow, her on poetry, where she reads these poems and really breaks them down, break, blow, burn, in this such an interesting way that you'll never hear poetry the same way again. So what I would like to do is play 1 minute of Blue, the opening, and then have you talk a little bit about sadness and how that works in this particular. Would you agree to do that?
Sure, absolutely. I would be
Okay.
honored.
Can you talk
Um,
a little bit about that? It's like, yes.
Sure. Well, simply that, before she records Blue, she has what you and I would call a nervous breakdown, but she calls a shamanic conversion. So she's in a very dark place whereby she feels that she is literally transparent to people and that people are literally transparent to her. She's so beset with pain that she can't even go grocery shopping. So Blue comes out of that kind of sadness. And, it's widely regarded as one of the most searingly personal albums ever. And the title song Blue, of course, um, being one of the super saddest. Um, and what you can hear in the title track is that she has been listening to a lot of Miles Davis, that Miles Davis is sort of her greatest influence and her lodestar. Um, and then within the song itself, it's interesting because it's the one song on the record that doesn't follow the standard format of verse, verse, chorus, verse, verse, chorus. So she sets it up, you know, to stand out in a way from all the other songs on the album. And that's part of why, in addition to the sound of her voice, which, as you quoted, sounds like a saxophone falling down a stairs to me. Yeah, no, those are two of these kind of really canny ways that she has to make the song as powerful as it is.
No, thank you. And and I think Hijira, you talk about that as well. And her foray into jazz um, was not the most popular move, but it makes it so powerful now as well. Um,
Right.
so narratively, there's something interesting that happened in your biographical journey, overarching, that you discover something that's very new to the Joni Mitchell hagiography, if you will, and that is kind of her life story in terms of the child she gave up at birth. Can you sketch
Oh,
it?
yeah, that's more or less the premise of the book is that she, when in 1968, she's 21 years old and she's forced to give her child up for adoption because abortion is out of the question. She has really conservative parents. And in very short order, after she gives the kid up, she writes her four biggest songs: Both Sides Now, Circle Game, Big Yellow Taxi, and Woodstock. And then over the course of the next 30 years or so of her career, she leaves sort of a series of Easter eggs, little messages to her daughter in the songs. And then in 1997, when she and the daughter finally track each other down, Joni writes no new music for the next 10 years, which is crazy, but I think is really compelling evidence that, that her having given up this child for adoption is really what's motoring a lot of her artistry.
Yeah, and that's fascinating. I just in the female journey, it's kind of like, and I think in the book there's some discussion of kind of like, well, then give up your children, like, and write music. But then, I mean, what do you make of that? Is that what you take? I mean, how do you feel about that personally? Because it's an interesting message.
Oh, I don't think it's a formula for success. And I think I mean, clearly her having given the kid up has brought a lot of pain. And then even the reunion, though lovely for about a year and magical for about a year, that too has been kind of painful for her. So, no, but I think it's a really interesting um, idea that some artists are able to take a scarring incident like that and channel it into their art, right? Whereas many of us dealt with that kind of a blow in life early on in life. We might have, curled up and not become artists, or we might have developed adorable drinking problems, or who knows how people deal with their pain. But she dealt with it in this spectacular way that made all this gorgeous music.
And I think there's so much and to savor here and to think about. And I think that she had polio as a child. Can you talk a little bit about that and then how that affected her music? Yeah,
Right. Yeah, she has polio when she's 10 years old, and it screwed up her neuropathy such that she had difficulty forming certain chords on her guitar. So she opted to use what's called open tuning, which is a thing that jazz musicians and blues musicians use a lot. And it just means that you only need to use one or two fingers on your fretboard of your guitar. But what's interesting is that she didn't stop there. She kept going so that she has invented more than 50 of her own artisanal tunings. And she will sometimes set these tunings to the sounds of her environment. So, like, she has one tuning where the bass note is the same note as Joni's dishwasher. Um, so super inventive. And it's for this reason that she sometimes gets that people sometimes refer to her as a musical genius. Not because of the beauty of Both Sides Now or the Circle Game, but because she's done some very kind of visionary stuff in terms of the way that people tune guitars.
Yeah, and the sound is so particular, like at the beginning of the album of Blue, because of a certain instrument that she uses that's not the guitar. Can you talk about
Oh, the
what that is and why? Yeah,
dulcimer.
and why?
Yeah. So the dulcimer is like a 3 or 4 stringed Appalachian stringed instrument. You play it on your lap and strum it like this. And that comes into her life because the summer of 1970, before she records Blue, she's traveling around Europe, and a guitar would have been too cumbersome for her to carry around, let alone a piano. So she carries around a dulcimer, and that's why we get it's the first thing you hear on Blue, the first notes you hear on Blue, and also A Case of You, California, Carrie. So four of the really killer songs on Blue are dulcimer based.
And I guess a final question that sort of wraps up a lot of different themes, which makes it such a brilliant book and so great to read. You know, Joni Mitchell is famously reclusive and doesn't give and doesn't give interviews, which is interesting. And I think that a colleague of ours has written something just so great of, Judith Warner, of like, Joni Mitchell made a mistake in not talking to Henry Alford for his superlative "I Dream of Joni," but it's his good fortune that she didn't.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And I think that's so telling because, and if you could speak to it, because in the same thing of the Princess Margaret, the snapshots that you get in this book that everybody must read of like, you've done so much research, but it made it so effortless. Even John Lennon is seen not in his tragedy of getting shot, but like making snarky comments about people. And James Taylor, you see him going from this heroin addict and then Carly Simon, and it's so messy. And then you describe him as what America's most well-loved mortician. I mean, it's like you really get a flavor of these folk going back and forth, and just her not trying to please people and just being herself. So, I mean, what do you make of that idea? I mean, you might have, of course, wanted to interview her, but I don't think the book suffers by you not. What do you think?
Oh, good. Yeah, you don't want to meet your heroes. That's always a very dicey proposition. So personally, I was fine with not meeting her. Yes, of course, my publisher would have loved me to have met her, but it's often easier to write about someone who you haven't met, particularly if you're polite as I am and seducible. And I think she could have very, very easily wrapped me up in a web of seduction, and then it would have been much harder to write about some of the more difficult stuff.
Yeah, it would have been a very different book. Um,
Yeah,
if you'll answer a question.
sure.
Okay. Mitchell has been very frank in interviews about the sexism she had encountered in the record industry. She's often referred to Geffen, for example, as paying far more attention to Dylan than Mitchell when they both recorded for Asylum. Can you address that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Being a woman in the recording industry, you got to remember that she didn't, she started out and w women couldn't even have credit cards at that time. So, and it is a male-dominated business, and she got in there. She figured out how to do it. Early on, she did have the help of David Crosby, who had just come off The Birds, so he was really white hot. And because he agreed to produce the first record, um, their label gave them sort of carte blanche. So that really did help. But no, she was her own producer for almost all of the other albums. And no, I think that's even more admirable, that she combines these skills of a consummate lyricist, a really interesting musician, and then she has clearly some real business savvy, and she knows how to get in there and use her elbows if she needs to.
So yeah, it's a fantastic book, and yes, and I wish we could talk more about, because there's so many more things, and that question starts to touch on this whole other thing about her and Dylan and the stuff that they say about each other. So it's a dishy book, it's gossipy, yeah, it's thoughtful, it's super smart, it's moving, it's hilarious, it's all the things, and everybody can go and listen to the opening of Blue, just the opening of the song Blue, and listen for that saxophone falling down the flight of stairs, which Joni Mitchell spirit came and said, don't play that on Bookish. So that's what, and we bless that. We bless the magic of that. So thank you so much. Our always favorite. So great to always speak with you. The great
Thank you
Henry
so much.
Alford, Henry Alfund. His new book is this, I Dream of Joni, a portrait of Joni Mitchell in 53 snapshots. It's a national bestseller, so run out and get it while you can. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next up, we pivot to two journalists to talk at the same time about their books today, and we're excited to have Nick Owchar and Brian Joseph in a discussion of books, very different, but also quite fantastic. For them both, here comes the 30-second download. Nick Owchar is former Los Angeles Times deputy editor of books coverage and a columnist, The Siren's Call. Currently, he serves as editorial director at Pitzer College, a member of the Claremont Colleges. His writing has appeared in numerous publications and publishing outlets, including the Los Angeles Review of Books, Kirkus Reviews, and Chronicle Books. His debut novel, just out, is A Walker in the Evening. Appearing with him is Brian Joseph, who's worked as a newspaper reporter and investigative journalist for 20 years, writing for the Las Vegas Review-Journal, Orange County Register, Sacramento Bee, and more. In 2013-14, he was an investigative reporting fellow at the University of California, Berkeley, Go Bears, where he explored foster care for Mother Jones magazine. Brian is a graduate of the University of Missouri, Columbia, and a recipient of a George Polk Award. Welcome to you both, Nick and Brian.
Thanks, Sandra. Glad to be here.
Good, welcome. And I love your shirt. Yes. So, and Brian can, well, I'll do your, and Brian can come on screen also. Let me see as I'm seeing in my gallery view. Yes, here we are. Okay, fantastic. So you have two very different books. One is a novel. One is nonfiction, although fascinatingly written. It reads like a novel. So we'll start with you, Nick, to answer the origin story of how you went from journalist and book review and all of that to what was the genesis of writing this, your first book?
Well, thanks for having us on again, Sandra. This is great. By the way, one of my favorite books, this goes way back, is Depth Takes a Holiday. That was great. Remember that one?
Yeah, I do. 25 years ago, God.
Yeah. So I was working at the LA Times. I was doing book coverage, and it wasn't a big leap. I love Gothic stories. I've always loved them. And stuff like Umberto Eco, The Name of the Rose. I'm not much of a Stephen King fan, but I'm more the other type. And
can you describe what the difference is for you between them?
Yeah, I mean, I think Stephen King falls more into the horror, thriller category, and Umberto Eco is usually, he's using ancient texts and mysteries and riddles, and I kind of love that because I look at stuff going on today and people's obsession with streaming and all that stuff, and I just think that classic literature and ancient literature still matters, and I love the way writers like Eco make it matter, make it relevant. So I think it was '05 or '06, a book came out that totally changed everything. It was Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code. And it came out and I was the editor at the book section. There were a ton of books that jumped on Brown's, coattails and copied him. We had a bunch of Da Vinci Code clones that came out. And so I reviewed a bunch of them for the paper and I kind of looked at them, and I was like, man, some of the stuff is not good and it's getting published. I can do this, I mean, that was the simple motivation. And so the story that I decided I was going to tell was your typical English ghost story. And I wanted to look at an artist who really fascinated me, from when I was a kid, a guy named Dante Rossetti, an English painter and poet who had a lot of eccentric and strange things that happened to him late in life. And it just seemed like a good thing to focus on as a ghost story. So I wrote a version of the novel that I publish now, but very different. And I found an agent. She peddled it around, couldn't get any traction for it. I think maybe it was just too derivative at the time, and maybe it was too overwritten, and it just wasn't sticking. And I look back on my journalism background, and the thing that really helped me, I think, is I didn't have any problems with writer's block. And I remember that there were a lot of times my agent said, why don't you try this? Why don't you add this story or add this plot twist or do that? And so I did, sure. I drafted out something fresh, sent it off, and nothing happened, and after a while, I just got frustrated with it. And, she wanted me to let it go and move on to something else. And, I probably could have, but I felt like, I hadn't learned a lesson yet as a writer with that manuscript. There was a mistake there that I hadn't figured out yet, and I felt like I needed to see it through all the way to the end. And it just wasn't clear to me what the story was missing. So, I was frustrated with it, but, I had the sage guidance of my very dear mentor, also known as my wife. And she said, hey,
Yay!
yeah, she said, hey, if it's bothering you, just put it down. Just put it away for a while. And so, come back to it when your energy is better. And so that's what I did. I put it aside. Life went on for a bit. I learned some lessons, and then I was able to come back to it and discover a different way to go with the story that made more sense to me. So, I mean, I guess I can leave it there, and then I can pick that up later if you want.
Sure, because a turn comes, something surprising happens that puts you in another direction. So we'll leave that as a cliffhanger and go to Brian to tell the origin story of your book. And then we'll go back to the cliffhanger. And then and Brian, you have to leave it as a cliffhanger. So until
I'll do my best. I'll do my best. It's a you're setting a high bar for me. I mean, my entry into all this started, much more humbly. An editor mentioned to me that I might have an interest in investigating sex trafficking because I had previously investigated foster care, and I thought, well, there's some similarities between those two populations, both marginalized populations that policymakers don't think a great deal about, and so I thought, well, if I've excuse me, if I've been able to report on foster children, maybe I'll be able to report on domestic sex trafficking victims. I ultimately found that the approach that I took with foster care wasn't exactly the approach I needed to take with sex trafficking, but it was simply that suggestion that sort of got me going. Now along the way, I had a lot of
what changed between the foster care and sex trafficking? Obviously they're different, but what in your method and thinking?
Well, so what I would say, primarily one of the biggest differences was that as related to foster care, typically there was an incident that I wanted to talk to with somebody. If there was a a foster parent where something bad happened in their care, I wanted to talk to them. Or if there was a biological parent that lost custody of their child, I wanted to talk to them. Now, in both of those cases, that parent or foster parent might not want to talk about the incident at hand, but wanted to talk about something. They wanted to talk about an unresponsive foster agency. They wanted to talk about the injustice of losing their child, something about that. So there was usually something to talk about initially. As it related to, excuse me, as it related to sex trafficking, what I found was that almost universally, nobody wanted to talk about anything. And so what I really had to do, is sort of back up and really do my homework, really show that I had understood the issue in its in its grays and its textures. And then from there, I really had to prove my my compassion as an individual, that I truly wanted to understand their story and how they saw things. And so there was a lot more of a lot more of a lead time of sort of developing a relationship with my sources. But that was really all that I really had there as an entry point. Now, along the way, I had a number of additional challenges. I left the paper that I was working with. Much like Nick, I had to find an agent. I had to find a publisher. There was a lot of challenges along the way. Also, I had never written a book before. I had to find a mentor to teach me how to I'd written of course investigations and numerous stories over the course of my life, but never something as ambitious as a book. And so I knew pretty early on that I needed somebody to help guide me. So those were the steps that I had to take to at least get going on this journey.
Okay, back to you, Nick, with the cliffhanger. And by the way, Mary Schultz says, Nick, hello from Colorado.
Mary,
Hi, Mary, welcome. Okay,
I love how this interview is being set up like a Gothic novel. This is great with the cliffhanger, Yeah, I mean, it was important to me, and I think a lot of other writers out there would understand, something wasn't clicking with my voice as a writer, and I was unwilling to let go of the manuscript. So I put it aside. A couple of years ended up going by, which was fine. I needed that time away from it. And the thing that changed, that I've mentioned elsewhere in some other interviews, we were having one of your periodic yard sales, garage sales. And right, so we were clearing out the garage, and I found the box that contain all my cassette tapes and my reporter notebooks from interviewing my dad. And I feel like I'm going to tear up just right now, but I'll try to get through it. So my dad was born in Western Ukraine in a village there in the 1920s. And I think the journalistic instinct for me had always been there, that I knew that he had a good story to tell. And I was bit by the journalism bug when I was, a teenager. I did a summer intern at the San Gabriel Valley Tribune, I could, write whatever I wanted. And I knew that there was something there. So I'd interviewed him over the years about life in the village, all the strange folk tales and customs and practices that they would, do there. And I had put that all away. And he and I had actually gone back before he died. We went back in the 1990s to his village, and we stayed there for a while. And I just did extensive notes. And I think as a journalist too, I would go around and harass these poor villagers, asking them question after question, just because I wanted as many details as I could for some future book, even though I didn't know what it was going to be. And I just put it away and forgot about it, or not forgot, but just life carried on, And so I found this box and I looked through it, and I was reading about they had this nightly practice in the village where there was no law enforcement. So each family would volunteer somebody to walk around the village all night. And my dad used to tell me about that and how weird it was, and how they carried this weird wooden post, this totem with the devil's head on it. And none of that was made up. I kind of looked at it and I kind of knew that I had something there that was Gothic that would fit the other story.
That is amazing. And that is as a plot of a man sets out to walk in the village, holding this, it's almost, it reads like an extended, fantastic short story because of the immediacy of it and the humanity of it and the detail of that village.
Oh, I'm so glad. I mean, and that the writing of that honestly came much easier. Suddenly, I wasn't struggling the way I had before. And I realized that I could set the story in this Ukrainian village and have this character walking around, but he happens to be an Englishman who left England for some reason involving this painter poet, and his narrative would be, you know, would connect the two worlds, and it kind of made sense and it clicked for me.
Okay, back to you, Brian. That was the cliffhanger. Can you like so? And
Well, I don't know if I can top that, but I'll see what I can do.
I just want to share as you go forth. I mean, reading your book, it is like I think I've mentioned to you, it is like reading. It's so engrossing to read, and it feels in fiction, like fiction, because it's a story, because you're so inside people's heads, but it feels very natural. And that and I think that you're taking prostitutes, sex workers inside their heads. They are completely either, you know, they're neither victims nor survivors. They're and
They're
details
three-dimensional people, hopefully.
Exactly. And details like if you have to walk the strip like for 5 hours in like in 6-inch heels, your feet are going to hurt. And to a point where I was starting to Google and say, are these real people? And they totally are. Like Molly Malls, who's like the Hugh Hefner of hip hop. Like, it's like, so can you just describe that process of interviewing someone, getting into their head, and how you made this story?
Well, I think what I was going to say is sort of my turning point, if you want to call it that, was I was very blessed with two phenomenal sources, the two best sources I've ever encountered in my journalism career, and those are the two main subjects of Vegas Concierge. One is a survivor, excuse me, her name is Angela, and the other is a retired vice sergeant. His name is Don, and I mean, I couldn't tell you how many hours I spent with both of them going over their stories and really, you know, as you put it, getting into their heads. I'd like to think that the book is as intimate as it is because of that time invested in developing those relationships and really getting to know them. Specifically as it relates to Angela, she and I talked weekly for literally years. I mean, we would miss a week here and there, but for the most part, we talked every week for years, and that's how I'd like to think that I was able to sort of understand her story and understand sort of, you know, the way she viewed her story. And it was the same with Don. I didn't have quite the same schedule with him, but there were times when I would talk with him on a fairly regular basis, and over time, you know, I'd like to think that I was able to crawl around in his head as well.
Yeah, you did an extraordinary job, and it's just a great read. Two very different books, both really fantastic. Just notes from the chat. Also, there's another note for you. Steve Carrillo says, Steve from Albany says he likes the mala you're wearing, Nick.
Peace be with you, Steve.
And Brian, we like your rack of books behind you. Very well, congratulations.
I have my spiritual gear too, you know.
Okay, what are you wearing?
You know, I don't know. There's some stones to remind me of my own spiritual practice.
See how this is all coming together, and I think with Henry, the two stags there, it's all, see, it's a very united show. Well, congratulations to you both, like terrific first books, and on top of pretty legendary careers. So thank you so much for that. And thank you so much for being, let me do a roundup here. We have Nick Owchar and Brian Joseph. They're two fantastic books. Vegas Concierge is Brian's book. Sex trafficking, hip hop, and corruption in America. And I do have to say, when I was looking up Molly Malls, I did go down the rabbit hole a little bit, like, oh, this guy isn't real, totally real. And then you see those hip hop videos, and it looks, and you will never see a hip hop video in the same way ever again. And Nick's book, which is A Walker in the Evening, fantastic. Thanks so much to you both. And thank you for being on Bookish. So that concludes this episode of Bookish. Thank you very much. Thanks for standing by with the technical moment from early, but thank you also to Henry Alford as well for his book, I Dream of Joni. We hope you've enjoyed the conversation today. Bookish will be back next month on March 24th. Remember, 4 p.m. It will be the 4th annual Noteworthy Salute to California Authors with special guest Lydia Yuknovich. And please join us for that. If you want to catch up on past episodes, check out all other virtual programs, go to the SCNG.com's website. If you have comments on today's show, you can email events@scng.com or our Lordess and Mastress, Sam Dunn at sdunn@scng.com. Remember, also, you can find great coverage on books in SCNG and Bay Area newspapers every day online at our sites and at the Book Pages newsletter. It's been wonderfully being with you all. Sandra Tsing Loh saying, peace out, have a wonderful weekend.